Hello, I'm Dave Riccio, and welcome to the Automotive Therapist. As the Automotive Therapist, it's my job to help you and your car feel better. I do this by putting you in the know when it comes to your car. If I can give you good information about your car, it'll relieve a lot of that anxiety that comes when the auto shop calls and says, want, that'll be $2,000. So the point here is to put you in the know so you feel comfortable you're making the right decision. Today, catalytic converters. What the heck is a catalytic converter? You may not know anything about it, but you're driving into work, the check engine light comes on, you take it to the auto shop and you're like, hey, check engine light's on. They go, yeah, it's gonna cost you this much to check it out. You leave the car. They call you a couple hours later and they say, hey, you need a catalytic converter, it's gonna be $1,500. You're like, $1,500 for what? My car drives perfectly fine. The only thing is that little yellow light. What is a catalytic converter? And they're telling you need one. Well, a catalytic converter is exactly this. Basically, it is a filter for the exhaust for your car before it goes out in the atmosphere. So on this end over here, that's connected to the exhaust manifold, which is part of the engine. Then you've got the exhaust pipe. This thick part right here is the actual catalytic converter. And then this other end goes out to the muffler and then out to the tailpipe in the back of your car. So that is what a catalytic converter looks like. So basically they're filters. And they're not filters like in your home where you got to change them because they plug up. It just creates a chemical reaction and it actually takes the toxic fumes out of the exhaust before they go out into the atmosphere. It takes toxic fumes and makes them non-toxic. How in the heck does it do that? Well, it's just little magic people in there. That's what does it. It's actually not, but the catalytic converter has porcelain honeycomb, so air can pass through it. This is porcelain, and this porcelain is coated with precious metals. Those precious metals are platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And I'm not sure on the pronunciation, I failed chemistry, but those precious metals are what actually start the chemical process as the exhaust goes out the tailpipe. So that's what that is. Okay. How do they fail? Well, catalytic converters in the perfect world would never go bad, but last I checked, the world isn't perfect. So what's happening to a catalytic converter, the reason they fail is they get heat cycled so much. So a catalytic converter on a cool day, in between stoplights, we'll see temperatures up to 1,500 degrees when you're accelerating hard, leaving the stoplight. And when you're decelerating, they'll go down, temperatures of 100 degrees. So you're going to range anywhere between 100 and 1,500 degrees, and that's between two stoplights. So they go from hot to cold, from hot to cold, from hot to cold, from hot to cold. Think about how many stoplights you go through. So eventually the materials just break down. The porcelain breaks down. And the way the metals are set up on the porcelain actually breaks down. So what happens is they actually lose their efficiency. And so the reason that little yellow light comes on is the computer is monitoring the catalytic converter's performance. It's monitoring the exhaust before the converter and the exhaust after the converter. And when it sees that there's no change in that exhaust and it says, hey, we got a problem, catalytic converter is not efficient, turns the check engine light on, you go to the auto shop and they tell you, hey, it's going to be a catalytic converter. So that's the one reason they fail. The other reason they fail is if your engine is ever running poorly and has what we call a misfire, where it's running rough and maybe one cylinder is not producing like it should, it's actually putting raw fuel and oxygen into the exhaust pipe and into the catalytic converter, and it overheats the catalytic converter as it burns. Instead of the catalytic converter getting up to 1,500 degrees, it shoots up to 2,000 degrees, and it actually melts and breaks down. So that's another way they fail. Thirdly, the way they fail is from physical damage. You drive over a speed bump way too fast, you bottom out the car, whack, and you hit the catalytic converter on the speed bump. That's another reason they would fail. So 3 reasons really a catalytic converter fails. What are the symptoms that you might experience if you got a catalytic converter going bad? Well, the most common, it's really not that symptomatic. It's just that little yellow check engine light. People hate that one because the car seems fine and yet it's going to need this expensive repair. It doesn't quite sit well with them, and I completely understand that. But essentially, that little yellow light, that is your symptom in that case. Now, the other way they can fail is if a catalytic converter actually plugs up. It overheats and it melts on the inside, the porcelain. It actually plugs up. In that case, you would have symptoms because the exhaust from the engine is not able to get past the catalytic converter. It's getting trapped, and so your car is going to run terrible. It won't even get out of its own way. As a matter of fact, the more gas you give it, the slower your car seems to go. So plugged up catalytic converters happen. It's usually that little yellow check engine light telling you the cat's bad, but on occasion they actually do plug up. So, and there is actually one other symptom, and that's physical damage. Let's say you hit your catalytic converter, you bottom out, you hit it on a speed bump. You break that porcelain loose inside the catalytic converter, and so now it's rattling. As the exhaust flows through it, you get some rattles out of it. So no symptom at all other than the check engine light, a car that won't get out of its own way that's running really poorly, that's a symptom, and then lastly some rattling that's coming from underneath the car. You can actually hear them when they go bad if they're rattling like that. How many catalytic converters does your car have? Well, in the old days that was a lot simpler question to answer, but as the design of cars have changed and they've gotten more efficient and they less pollute, catalytic converters in a car, some cars have 1, some cars have 4, and anywhere in between. And there really is no standard or rule of thumb. The modern V8 a lot of times will have 4 catalytic converters. V8 has 2 banks, so 2 exhaust manifolds. So you have 2 upstream catalytic converters and 2 downstream catalytic converters. So that one would have 4. 4 cylinders a lot of times will have just 1 or 2 catalytic converters. V6s, sometimes 4, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. There is no rule of thumb for how many you have. So can you ignore a bad catalytic converter? You know, being in an auto shop, yes, people love to ignore catalytic converters because if it's just that little yellow light, then the car's still driving fine, catalytic converter is expensive. By all means, they're just going to ignore the catalytic converter. So can you ignore a catalytic converter? Yes, as long as it's not plugged up. Now, if you ever got to go through emissions, you're not going to be able to make it through emissions. You will have to address the catalytic converter. Are you polluting more than the next guy? Yes, you're polluting more than the next guy because your catalytic converter is not working. And then also, the problem with the check engine light is it comes on for about 200 different reasons. So if your catalytic converter is bad and the light's just on all the time, either the bulb burns out, that could happen, although I've never really seen that happen. But if something else comes out and your car needs comes up and your car needs attention, you're not going to know it because it's just the same check engine light. So by ignoring it, you kind of quit. You kind of take out of play a system that's designed to tell you when there's a problem. So how much do catalytic converters cost? Well, catalytic converters cost, there's a huge range, okay? In the perfect world, you want to buy an original equipment catalytic converter. So this one that I have here, I believe is out of a front-wheel drive General Motors product. And if you bought, you know, you could go, whether you go to the dealer or independent, they're perfectly capable of getting you original equipment General Motors catalytic converter. In that case, they would unbolt 3 bolts over here on this end, 2 bolts over here on that end. They would take that one down. That one actually gets shipped back and remanufactured. And then they would put the new one in, they would bolt it in, 3 bolts here, 2 bolts there, and you drive away. That's a new catalytic converter. That's probably the most expensive way to go, but because they're made with a lot of precious metal, the original equipment catalytic converters have the best materials in them. So they are absolutely designed for the car. So a lot of times people get sticker shock because they're like, whoa, that's super expensive. That's more than I would think it would be. And so it's really enticing to try and go with an aftermarket catalytic converter, in which case there's a couple aftermarket catalytic converters types. There's a direct bolt fit-in, and those are the same thing. You unbolt them, you bolt the new one back in. Let me tell you something, they're not direct fit. I mean, you always got to shoehorn them in. They never quite fit right. So that's one style of aftermarket catalytic converter. The other style of aftermarket catalytic converter is actually a Weldon type, in which case they would cut that exhaust pipe, and they would cut the exhaust pipe over here, they put this guy in there, and then they would actually weld a bead around here and weld a bead around there, and there's your catalytic converter. So that's another style. If you can avoid going aftermarket, I like to, you know, if you're toward the end of the life of the car, you know, people do. The problem with aftermarket catalytic converters is they are cheaper because they have less precious metal, less platinum, less palladium, less rhodium. And so they kind of front load the converter too, where they put all the metal kind of up on one side. There's kind of, you know, they don't last. So maybe a year goes by, 2 years go by, and guess what? The little yellow check engine light comes on again. It's a catalyst deficiency code. So if you do have to buy a catalytic converter and you don't want to buy one twice, maybe consider buying a good catalytic converter. That's going to be the best way to go. How long do catalytic converters actually last? Well, other than hitting one on a speed bump or not addressing a misfire in your car and burning one down, melting one down, they actually will last somewhere between 150 and 200,000 miles. Somewhere in that window. That's just kind of the life expectancy of a catalytic converter. That doesn't mean you can't get 250,000 miles out of a catalytic converter. If you're living right, by all means, you can get 250,000 miles on it. Cars are all designed differently with a little different parameters. That's just a good rule of thumb. you're not generally going to see them fail before 100,000 miles. If they do, catalytic converters are covered by an 8-year, 80,000 mile warranty. Even though the original warranty on the car ran out, federally regulated auto manufacturers have to guarantee that catalytic converter for 8 years and 80,000 miles. So if you see one go down at 60, chances are it's probably still under warranty. If you're dealing with a good independent, they're going to check it out for you. They're going to call the manufacturer and they're going to get it warranted for you. So that's how long they actually last. Thanks for joining me to stay in the know when it comes to your car. Please subscribe to the Automotive Therapist. I'm going to keep you in the know. I'm going to give you comfort, but with good information, not too in-depth, not too superficial, but good information so that you can know about your car and you can have a good conversation with the people at the auto shop when you're facing an auto repair. So be sure to subscribe and really like the video because it makes me feel good. It lets me know that you appreciate the video. Also, for a more in-depth look at catalytic converters, I put some links below if you want to go way deep down into the granular level. We can do that. Until then, we'll see you next time.